thank you for this group of people that found time in their schedule to come out and study your word. And I'd ask that you just help us to make good use of the time. Help us to listen to one another and to learn from each other, and help us to ask the questions that are on our hearts. And just use this time together so that we can all grow a little closer to you and get a little more in tune with who you are, how you'd like us to live, how much you love us. In Yeshua's name, amen. Okay, I can't say how excited I am that we have some new people here, so it behooves me to go review a thing or two. Torah study is essential to what we're doing here. So we always, once a week, we'll get together and study the Torah. That's in addition to what we do on Shabbat. And so we've been going through the Torah. They have a cycle. You know, the sages put together, they divided the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, from Genesis through Deuteronomy, into 54 portions. And they allot those portions every year so that if you read one portion a week, by the time you get to the end of the year, you've read the whole Torah. And I remember the first time we did this, I thought, well, that's good, but you know, it's only a year. Then what? And it turns out that the Jews timed this so that the year ends at Sukkot. That's in September, October. And that's when you finally finish reading the last few chapters of Deuteronomy, and you wind the Torah scroll back up, and the next week you start over again at Genesis 1:1. And so every year you go through the Torah this way. And if you do it religiously, then you will have studied the entire Torah every year. And they make a big deal about that. They call that Simchat Torah, whenever they wind the Torah scroll back. Anyway, that's a very common way to do it. What we have found in doing that is that there's a lot of material in the Torah, and these portions, sometimes it's hard to get a whole portion done in like an hour and a half or so. So we took a vote at the beginning, and we decided that what we would do is, rather than rush through it in a specific time frame, we would just spend an hour and a half together discussing it, reading it and discussing it, and then the next week we would just pick up where we ended up. And so that threw us off in terms of the schedule, but we've been doing that for a couple of years now, and it seems to be working well. So that's the first thing I wanted you to know, is that we are currently toward the end of the book of Deuteronomy. So if this is your cup of tea, we'll start Genesis here in a few weeks, and you can start the whole thing all over again. And I've been doing this for a long time. It's kind of surprising, actually, because I tell different people, I say that if this was a passing fad or something like that, I'm sure I would have given up by now. But I've been doing this through the Torah cycle. This has got to be my 15th or 16th year. And I know I don't look that old. But anyway, yeah. Yeah, whenever you want to say something, just raise your hand.
So
we'll give
Jerry's
you
a little humble here. He developed all the materials you're going through today, all on his own, years and years ago. So these materials are purchased across the globe from different communities and stuff. So yeah, he's done a great job on putting this together.
I have had some interesting customers. There's no two ways about it. But what I did was, I was approached to do this back in the year 1999. And I said, I don't know anything about the Torah. And they says, well, you'll figure it out. You know, just do this. And so I don't like to just speak. You know, I think it's the Greek model where someone who's supposed to know more about it than you do stands up and tells you what you're supposed to know and think. And I can't do that. I get real uncomfortable after about 3 or 4 minutes, because I feel like, does anybody even know what I'm talking about? So I developed this method where you ask questions. So basically, these books that go with the Torah study, there's one book for every book of the Torah. And the idea is if you keep up, and there's a section, wherever we are, you can read the questions, and there's a gap below the questions, and you can answer the questions. Some of the questions are real simple. They're basically along the lines of, what did you just read? Some of them are kind of, how do you suppose it made them feel questions? And some of them are questions that absolutely have no answer. But the idea is all of them are meant to generate discussion. And what I've found is that as we discuss it, God, you're here because you want to know about God, more about God and His Word. And whenever you discuss it, whenever you ask these questions and everybody is engaged, He's there. He helps. And that's why I say I do this all the time, is because every year when I go through this, I learn something else. And every year I feel better and better about what we're doing. So anyway, enough of the sales job. John?
So the Torah consists of?
The Torah consists of the first 5 books, Genesis through Deuteronomy. Another term you hear a lot, some of these terms are defined in here, by the way, is the Tanakh. The Tanakh is an acronym. It's T-N-K. T is for Torah, N is for Nevi'im, which is the prophets, and K is Ketuvim, which is the writings. So if you take the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, that would be the first 5 books, plus things like Isaiah, and, the different prophets, and then the writings, Psalms and Proverbs, all of that kind of stuff. What we as Christians usually call the Old Testament, that's Hebrews, Jews call that the Tanakh. Okay, and then the New Testament is they call that the Brit Hadashah. Brit is the covenant, and Hadashah is new, or renewed. So the Brit Hadashah is the renewed covenant. So we look at all of that because we think it's all a unified whole. But I should maybe speak for myself. I certainly believe that the New Testament, the Brit Hadashah, can't be really well understood unless you study the Torah or the Tanakh along with it, because almost everything that was ever said in the Brit Hadashah goes directly back to the Torah. It either quotes it, or it talks about some event that happened back there, or something. So it's like that's the foundation. So I'm just excited about that. I get excited.
Amen.
Yep. Amen. Okay. Anyway, so let me move along then and talk about where we are. We're toward the end of the book of Deuteronomy, and each of the books of the Torah has a very different feel to it. And the book of Deuteronomy is special. Deuteronomy is a Greek word, deutero and nomi. Deutero means second, and nomi means law. So it's the second law. And what it is, it's the retelling. The Deuteronomy is kind of a synopsis of the first 4 books, okay? But it's a little more than that, because Deuteronomy has almost no action in it. It's Moses. The Israelites have come out of Egypt, and they've spent their 40 years wandering around the desert and doing all the interesting things that happened to them there, and they've come through up the east side of the Jordan River, and they're sitting all encamped on this plateau up near the plains of Moab, they call it. And I've been there. The plains of Moab are just across the Dead Sea from the Judean hills, if you will. And from there, you can look across the Dead Sea Valley, and you can see the hills in which Jerusalem sits. And if it were a clear day, you could probably see the Mediterranean Ocean out there. But anyway, so you got Moses and all the Israelites hanging around up there. And they've had some adventures, of course. And Moses at this time is 120 years old. And God has told him, says, well, you're not going to cross the Jordan and enter the promised land. Even though you've spent the vast majority of your life doing what I wanted you to do, getting these people all together so that they can go over there, you're not going to go over there. And the reasons he's not going over there are discussed in the Torah, and we'll get there. That's something to look forward to next year, right? But anyway, so the book of Deuteronomy is Moses standing there in front of all of these Israelites and telling them what they should do. He's admonishing them, he's encouraging them, and he's telling them what's on his heart. And Moses being Moses, it ends up being what's on God's heart. It's got a lot of prophetic nature to it, but it's Moses' monologue. It's Moses' monologue before he dies. At the end of the book of Deuteronomy, spoiler alert. At the end of the book of Deuteronomy, Moses goes up on the mountain at Moab. It's called Mount Nebo, and he dies, and God buries him. So that's where we're at. So we're in chapter 24, and this is a kind of I'll use the word tedious part, because he's reviewing a lot of Deuteronomy is Moses telling the Israelites, you need to pay attention to these laws that God has given you. These laws are very important. And so he's telling them the laws are important, and he's reiterating what the laws are. So that's why they call it Deuteronomy. It's the second law. So he's telling them the things that they need to remember. And this is really getting to a good part. You ought to at least come the next few weeks because, Moses gets really wound up here toward the end, and you can really feel what's going on, and it's really pretty exciting. But we're just leaving a tedious part because he has gone through a whole bunch of, rather obscure things in the Torah and told them, and we get off into some great discussions about these because some of the things that are written that God wants us to do or wants the Israelites to do are a little hard to wrap your mind around. But that's part of the fun of the discussion, right? A lot of times when we end up the discussion, we won't have reached a conclusion. But that's something you really need to get used to because there's going to be things we don't know when we get there, and we can ask him. And nobody knows it all. I'm certain nobody around on this earth knows it all. So that living with things, a lot of times you have to say, well, I don't really understand that. I'm just going to put it on the shelf, and maybe next year when we come back here, I'll know more about it. Okay. So any questions or any thoughts? Okay. Chapter 24, I think did we start that? I believe we did. So it was chapter 24, the first few verses. Actually, it was just the first 4 verses. Yep. I'll read them. Usually I get you guys to read, but I'll just read this because we did that last week. Chapter 24, so I'm going to read the first 4 verses. If a man marries a woman who becomes displeasing to him because he finds something indecent about her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce, gives it to her, and sends her from his house, and if after she leaves his house and she becomes the wife of another man, and her second husband dislikes her and writes her a certificate of divorce, or gives it to her and sends her away from his house, or if he dies, then her first husband who divorced her is not allowed to marry her again after she has been defiled. That would be detestable in the eyes of Yahweh. Do not bring sin upon the land that Yahweh your God is giving you as an inheritance. So we won't replow all of this ground, but that was a specific passage that the Pharisees came to Yeshua with in one of the Gospels. I can't remember exactly which. I've got it written down in here somewhere. And because the Pharisees, the Levites in the time of Yeshua had been using this to indicate that any man can divorce his wife anytime he wants if she displeases him. And of course, they were trying to trap him in some kind of a question, and then Yeshua got into this great discussion about getting married and about what divorce is all about and about how God never intended for divorce to happen, but he gave it, if you will. He allowed it to happen because of the hard-heartedness of his people. Anyway, does anybody recall what we talked about last week, and did you come away with anything, or do you have any new thoughts about that one? Otherwise, we'll move on. Okay, good. Verse 5. Let's see. Does someone want to read from... verse 5 to the end of chapter 24, and then we'll go back and talk about each little part separately. Would somebody like to do that? We like to, by the way, you don't have to feel obligated to read, but a lot of people like to read. And if there's a long, pregnant pause, I'll read. But if somebody wants to read from verse 5 to the end of the chapter, it doesn't matter what version you have. We'll all the different versions a lot of times get us insight into stuff. You want to do it, Paul?
Thank you. When a man is newly married, he shall not go out with an army or be liable for any public duty. He shall be free at home 1 year to be happy with his wife whom he has taken. No one shall take a mill or an upper millstone in pledge, for that would be taking a life in pledge. If a man is found stealing one of his brothers of the people of Israel, and if he treats him as a slave or sells him, then that thief shall die. So you shall purge the evil from your midst. Take care in case of a leprous disease, to be very careful to do according to all that the Levitical priests shall direct you. As I commanded them, so you shall be careful to do. Remember what the Lord your God did to Miriam on the way as you came out of Egypt. When you make your neighbor a loan of any sort, you shall not go into his house to collect his pledge. You shall stand outside, and the man to whom you make the loan shall bring the pledge out to you. And if he is a poor man, you shall not sleep in his pledge. You shall restore to him his pledge as the sun sets, that he may sleep in his cloak and bless you. And it shall be righteousness for you before the Lord your God. You shall not oppress a hired worker who is poor and needy, whether he is one of your brothers or one of the sojourners who are in your land within your towns. You shall give him his wages on the same day before the sun sets, for he is poor and counts on it, lest he cry out against you to the Lord, and you be guilty of sin. Fathers shall not be put to death because of their children, nor shall children be put to death because of their fathers. Each one shall be put to death for his own sin. You shall not pervert the justice due to the sojourner or the fatherless, or take a widow's garment in pledge, but you shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you from there. Therefore I command you to do this. When you reap your harvest in your field, and forget a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back to get it. It shall be for the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow, that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. When you beat your olive trees, you shall not go over them again. It shall be for the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow. When you gather the grapes of your vineyard, you shall not strip it afterwards. It should be for the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Therefore, I command you to do this. That's the English Standard Version.
That's fine. Thank you. So let's go back. A lot of these kind of tie together, but let's go back to verse 5. If a man is recently married, he must not be sent to war or have any other duty laid on him. For 1 year, he is to be free to stay home and bring happiness to the wife he has married. What do you think about that? What do you think about that rule? Think it's a good idea? Yeah. It's not the first time we've seen this, by the way. This was explained in some great detail. I don't remember whether it was in Deuteronomy or Numbers, where God told how whenever the nation of Israel was to go to war, the Levites were going to give them a kind of a pep talk, and then the officers got up and gave them a pep talk. And one of the things the officers said, if one of you is recently married and you haven't had an opportunity to be with your wife, go home. So, do you remember the discussion we had on that, or what are some of your thoughts, John?
Well, I think the discussion was that wasn't the only thing about
there were
not
several.
going right.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know. I mean, obviously, that's the idea. There was that you don't want a bunch of people in war that aren't fully committed and focused on the task at hand.
Yeah.
And I guess it's reiterated here because it's important to have, even if you die in war, but you have an opportunity to have offspring, then that's an important thing in Torah, because you're passing the covenant down to the next generation.
That's a good point. That's a good point. I always thought this was a very humane and sensitive, civilized thing to do. Though what John's referring to, the place where we saw this earlier, it said this. It says if you're recently married. It says if you've just built a new house. One of the things it said, if you're scared to death, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but if you're scared to death about going to fight in battle, don't come. Okay? So the idea is while in essence, I guess you could say they probably had a conscripted army, it was pretty easy to get out of it. Like John says, the idea was you need to want to be there. You ought to want to be there because either perish the thought you like the adventure of war, or you believe in what they're doing, and you patriotic, however you want to look at it. So I don't know. I've always thought that was a pretty good thing. It's not a real deep subject. Okay. Then let's move on. Verse 6. Do not take a pair of millstones, not even the upper one, as security for a debt, because that would be taking a man's livelihood as security. What? You don't understand. I'm glad you said that. Can anybody kind of paraphrase what that really means? I will. I'll give it a shot.
It's-
Let's say a auto mechanic owes you a bunch of money, and he hasn't got it, and he offers to give you his set of tools until he can pay back the money. Don't take his tools, okay? Because if you're taking his tools, you're taking away his means of making money. You're taking away his means of livelihood. So that's essentially what it's saying here. Whenever somebody owes you money, you have a right to your money, but don't be vindictive or cruel. Don't make it harder on somebody. So that's what I get out of that. Maybe there's something else. John?
Well, I just thought that was kind of a good analogy. But Rekev is the word, if I picked the right one,
Which one?
the pledge,
Okay.
or what? Let me see. Let me make sure.
Security for a debt. Yep.
Let me.
Oh, that's the millstone. Well, what a millstone?
Okay, it is. It's the tools. That's the point. It says a vehicle, by implication, a team, by extension, Calvary, by analogy. So anyway, it was just kind of interesting how you auto mechanic and the vehicle.
I made that up, obviously. But a millstone, what it is they would have a big stone that was kind of a circular trough, and then another stone that sat perpendicular to it, a round stone, and they would roll it around in here. So they would put wheat or whatever in there and roll this stone around, and that would grind it up or pulverize it. And if you took his millstone, even his top one, then the mill's no good, right? And the guy can't use it.
Well, it's a bit of a sidebar. What's the name of the Israeli tank? Isn't the Rikaba or the
Oh, it's
it's the chariot, word for chariot.
macabre?
Yeah, I think
like
it's
that.
the same word.
It might be. A pulverizer. So, I thought that's, again, this starts a whole section that's kind of like that.
Well,
Go ahead.
if you take away his tools, then you're putting him in a bad position, and you're lording on over him easier. It's easier for you to lord over him, which he doesn't want.
Yeah. It just occurred to me, that's kind of like the guy owes you money. I mean, there's no argument there, right? So by taking his tools as security, it's kind of like the Pharaoh saying, okay, now you can make bricks without straw. Okay? If you thought the job was hard before, now try.
Good luck with that.
Yeah. So anyway. Verse 7, if a man is caught kidnapping one of his brother Israelites and treats him as a slave or sells him, the kidnapper must die. You must purge the evil from among you. That's a very definite proscription and assignment of penalty for the crime of kidnapping. Right? Kidnappers die. I remember when I first heard about this as a young person, I thought, gee, that seems kind of harsh.
Right.
But boy, God doesn't think
They'll
it's
bring
harsh.
him back if you just pay the money.
Yeah. What's the big deal? Why do you kill a guy for that? But do you understand what it means by you must purge the evil from among you? Well, I think kidnapping itself is a terrible thing. Kidnapping is a terrible thing. Yeah, I agree with that. What if you kidnap but you didn't sell it? You just kept it. Well, that's Well, that's a good point. Kidnapping, to me, okay, I'll say this, and then I'm going to answer your question. Kidnapping to me always meant holding the person ransom. Kidnapping and ransom kind of went hand in hand, but never uses the word ransom here. But it goes on and it says, kidnapping one of his brother Israelites and treats him as a slave or sells him. So treats him as a slave would kind of be like keeping him. So I guess, same thing. Being held against your will is kidnapping?
Yes.
Mike?
Technically, Joseph was kidnapped.
That obviously fits there. Yep. So what does that say about Joseph's brothers? Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think they might.
You think what?
That's a sidebar.
Okay.
So, I guess what I would, I think it puts a great emphasis on one's liberty. And the key concept of liberty is to be able to go where you want to go, and freedom basically. But it's part of it is just to go wherever you want to go.
Mhm.
Why are you restricting me from doing,
Mhm.
something I want to do? As long as I'm not causing any damage to somebody else,
Mhm.
you have essentially kidnapped me if you're preventing me from going somewhere.
Yep.
So he's putting a great premium on that
Mhm.
concept.
That you're reminded of the phrase life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those are the things that, God created all men with the, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's liberty.
So the word that is used here is ganab, or ganav, or one or the other. And it says the primitive root is to thief, by implication to deceive, carry away, secretly, to steal, to get by stealth. So one could imagine if I said, hey, Jerry, I want you to come work for me for a little while, and I got 40 acres out there, and blah blah blah. And then, but you say that'd be great. Now you get there, and I held you captive
Mm-hmm.
as a slave or to work.
Mm-hmm.
Then I've deceived you. You came willingly, but by deception. So that's one of the definitions that's included in that. So.
Okay. Marvin. Oh, go
So
ahead.
just, we struggle back and forth between a servant and a slave.
Yes.
This is definitely a slave because he's doing it involuntarily.
Good point.
Who does that remind us of?
Other than Joseph?
Yeah,
Okay, yeah. Who are you thinking of?
Jacob.
Oh, yeah. Oh, Laban did that to Jacob, for sure. And
No, I'm going to push back.
Okay, you don't like that, huh?
No. He may have tricked him into the wife he wanted, but it was Jacob who said to Laban, "I will stay. I will." He came up with the "I will be here for 7 years" thing. I don't think he had any strong desire to go back. Now I didn't know about 20 years, but
Yeah. Okay, food for thought. Moving along, verse 8. In cases of leprous diseases, be very careful to do exactly as the priests, who are Levites, instruct you. You must follow carefully what I have commanded them. Remember what Yahweh your God did to Miriam along the way after you came out of Egypt. Okay, so for those of you that haven't been through all the laborious stuff in Leviticus that talks about the role that the priests play in leprosy, and leprosy in general. We always have big discussions on leprosy. The point is this is Moses telling the Israelites, the Levites are the ones that get to judge, A, whether you have leprosy, B, whether you're cured of leprosy, and C, whether you can come back into the fold. So and it says he's admonishing the Israelites, pay attention to them and do what they say. Then it says, you must follow carefully what I have commanded them. Remember what Yahweh your God did to Miriam along the way after you came out of Egypt. So who can describe this story, by the way, of what happened to Miriam is in Numbers chapter 12. Does anybody remember that story about what happened to Miriam? Who wants to kind of paraphrase it? Give me a thumbnail sketch of what happened to Miriam.
Michael's excited too.
Oh, everybody's excited when you talk about leprosy.
Oh, well, did Aaron get leprosy too? Because didn't they conspire? They wanted to.
Aaron was involved. Tell me what you think. What you remember happened.
They conspired to. I guess they conspired. They wanted to have the same leadership role as Moses, and they complained, how come we are on equal terms with you, more or less.
Heck,
But
they
she
were-
got leprosy. I don't recall that Aaron did, though,
He
did
did
he?
not.
No.
We always have a big discussion about that. But that's what happened. You were right. Miriam and Aaron were, I'll use the word bad-mouthing. Moses, they happened to pick the reason of his Cushite wife or something, but they were complaining, and exactly as you said, I don't know why everybody thinks, well, who made him king? We're every bit, heck, we're his older brother and sister. We ought to be doing this. Who gave him the right to do this? And it's a great story, that story, because if you read some of the little small words in there, You know, it was allowed to go on for about 5 minutes, and oh God, he just, yeah, I draw the analogy. He grabbed him by the back of the neck and he put him down and he says, "You sit here and you listen to what I've got to say," you know. And he basically, he just nails him. He says, you know who I picked. You don't get to question what I'm doing here. And as punishment, Miriam was struck immediately with leprosy. And one of the things that does, and one of the things this even helps cement that, is part of the issue is that leprosy somehow or another has a linkage with what they call lashon hara, the evil tongue, with bad mouthing and rumor mongering and backstabbing, that kind of stuff, because that often shows up when people have been doing that, you know. So that tie-in is there somewhere. It's not real strong, but we'll talk about that again as we come back there. But the other is your question about, so Aaron and she together did this, right? She may very well have initiated, it doesn't say. But so how come Aaron didn't get leprosy? And we always had this really interesting answer as to why.
He's the high priest.
If he had leprosy, he couldn't do his job. So Aaron got a get-out-of-jail-free card, kind of.
He's the Teflon priest.
Yeah. But the truth of the matter is, I think if it weren't for that, I think Aaron was every bit as guilty.
But the thing that instigated it was the Midianite wife.
Mm-hmm.
That's what
Moses.
what they used
Well,
as
that's what they
the vehicle
used.
to complain about.
And yeah, basically what it was rebellion against God's established order. I mean, up until that time, everybody knew Moses was the guy, right? And all of a sudden, they decided, well, heck, you know, what makes him so special? Like I say, given that they're the older brother and sister, you can see why he might do that. But God, man, go back and read that if you haven't. It's a great story.
So this is about, do you have any more on this? Or?
No, go ahead.
Well, it goes in great detail, and this is one of the things that they would have looked for a sign of the Messiah, that he could solve this problem. And it says, go to the priest. Yeshua, when he heals the leper, he tells him, go to the priest, you know, follow what the Torah says. So I think that's interesting. But I looked, and there's a standalone olive tav in that verse 9. Remember standalone olive tav, what God thy Elohim did unto Miriam. So I think that's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to?
No, not really.
John, okay. You don't want to. Okay, fine. Moving along, verse 10. When you make a loan of any kind to your neighbor, do not go into his house to get what he is offering you as a pledge. Stay outside and let the man to whom you are making the loan bring the pledge out to you. If the man is poor, do not go to sleep with his pledge in your possession. Return his cloak to him by sunset so that he may sleep in it. Then he will thank you, and it will be regarded as a righteous act in the sight of Yahweh your God. So what's going on there? So you're making a loan to somebody. Now that automatically kind of puts a difference in levels between the two people, right? Because the person that's making the loan has got resources that the person that needs the loan doesn't have, right? So there's one thing right off the bat. John?
The thing that I get out of it is it's like, let's do business outside the house. Mm-hmm. It's a way for the lesser person, the one who's in debt, to save face in front of his family. That's how I look at it.
I think that's a very big part of it. In other words, you're already loaner. You already are in a superior position. Don't rub the guy's nose in it. You know, don't lord it over him. Yeah.
I also think it's God wants us to be respectful of people's property.
Mm-hmm.
You don't just walk into the guy's house and take it. You know, you wait for him to bring it to you.
Good point. Very good point. Now, the idea of the pledge is like collateral, right? And a lot of times the pledge was, in many cases, the pledge was more valuable than the amount loaned. And the idea being is you're sure that you're going to get your money back because he would rather give you the money back than have you keep this thing that you gave him. You know, so a pledge can a lot of times be something of great value. Yeah, Mark?
Interesting side note, or kind of correlates to it. So the Israelites' home at the time they were in Egypt was Egypt, right? That was their home.
Mhm.
Did God make the contract with them in their house, or did he take them out?
Good point. He took them out.
So it's interesting that whenever he says, I'm going to take the bride and I'm going to take her into the wilderness, nourish her, I got a feeling that whenever things come down to the final point, we're going to get taken out of our house and he's going to enter into the contract with us in another place.
That's a good point. That's a good point. So it goes on to say that if a cloak is being used as a pledge, give him his cloak back at night. Don't make him sleep in the cold. And then that goes on to some detail. It says, then he will thank you, and it will be regarded as a righteous act in the sight of Yahweh your God. Again, one of the things, and this is just one example, all over the place, God is telling you, go out of your way to be considerate of those that are not as fortunate or that don't have the same blessings that you have. Don't be stingy. Don't cling to stuff, Be generous. Be helpful. And we'll come to much more of that.
What I like about this is still love your neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
But you get to see Yah's heart on what that looks like in everyday practice.
Yep.
Some of this isn't everyday practice for us. I mean, I'm not going to go get the millstone and all this kind of stuff, but the principle's there. We can see the principle in application. And then it even reminds me of when, the man asked Yeshua, he says, well, who is my neighbor?
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of dialed down. So we can kind of see this because even the sojourner, the person passing through the land, you're still going to respect them, even though you might know who your neighbor is or your brother, you know who they are. Now here's the stranger, and you still are going to treat with the same level of kindness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the do unto others as you'd have them do to you situation. Yeah. John?
Well, the Messiah also says something to the effect that whatever you do to the least of them, you do to me.
Yep. Yep.
So
yeah, it's all
you're going to
over
have
the
to
place.
answer to me ultimately.
One of the things you were saying, Paul, that I like about that is I remember, again, as in my early days of being a naive Christian, I used to think, well, I love my neighbors. I can't think of a single neighbor I've got that I don't love, And that was a poor definition of love on my part because I was equating it with essentially, I don't hate them, but this is what love looks like, right? Love looks like doing something that makes a difference to that person, and something that may cost you a little bit. I mean, this is going to be just a minor inconvenience for the guy that's loaning the money, right? But it's a big deal to the guy that pledged his cloak. So the Torah is full of examples. Verse 14: do not take advantage of a hired man who is poor, needy, whether he is a brother Israelite or an alien living in one of your towns. Pay him his wages each day before sunset, because he is poor and is counting on it. Otherwise, he may cry out to Yahweh against you, and you will be found guilty of sin. So that also gives you an idea of how the economy worked back then, and why being a servant was a pretty good gig, right? Because if you were a servant, you got your food and your housing included most of the time, such as it was. But if you're a hired hand, and a lot of times even today, these guys don't have any money. So if you say, well, didn't get to the bank today, tomorrow, I can pay tomorrow or whatever, you need to realize that might be inflicting an undue hardship on this guy. And God says, don't do that. Anytime you're in a position to, I'll say, bless someone, certainly fulfill your obligation, do so. I remember one time I was kind of convicted of this. Again, this was way back in my less enlightened life. But some guy who was a neighbor had used his earth-moving caterpillar to help dig a bunch of holes, big place for a septic tank in my house. And somehow or another, I never got around to paying him, certainly in a timely fashion. And I remember one time God just basically nailed me and says, what kind of person are you that lets this guy that's obviously in a worse financial position than you are not get paid by you? And I felt so bad. I right away, I went and got the money and gave it to him and told him I was sorry and I should have paid him earlier. But, this is an important thing to do. So, and he goes on and he says, he says this in the next one. Well, never mind. We'll get there in a minute. Doesn't matter whether he's a brother or an alien or anybody. You need to do that. Verse 16, fathers shall not be put to death for their children, nor children put to death for their fathers. Each is to die for his own sin. Okay, I understand what that says. And I don't have any problem with what it says. But boy, my big question is, why is it here? As opposed to some other place. We're here talking about how to treat people and, different things. And does anybody, I don't have an answer to that question. Yeah.
Well, I don't have an answer to it, but I have a question about it.
Okay.
So how would you respond to this? How does this deal with, I will curse you to the third or the fourth generation for those that provoke me to jealousy? Mm-hmm. They're apples and oranges?
Well, yeah. They are apples and oranges, I think. Cursing is not the same as...
Being put to death.
Well, certainly put to death. But I mean, cursing is not the same as punishment for a sin, even. Cursing is something, I'm just making this up as I go, right? But cursing is something that happens in your life. It's circumstances that happen to you.
Right. You can, in theory, change them if you figured out how to do the right thing.
Yeah. And sometimes, I don't know if I want to go there. I probably never mind. Mark has something.
So I'm sure all of you know the three different words, sin, iniquity, and transgression. Mm-hmm. In this verse, it's using the word for sin. In the verse that John mentioned, it's iniquity.
Okay, so they're different. Okay.
So let me jump on here and go out on this limb right over here. So when you look at your sin, but when you start looking at lawlessness, or the law comes with blessings and curses. So now, if the curse, because you don't follow the law and you're not teaching them to your children and they don't inherit your teaching, then you're basically teaching them or letting them raise up or being brought up with the curse.
Yeah.
So it's not like, I don't think it's like, okay, a lot of people think, how do I say this? He doesn't curse people. They choose whether they will choose the blessing or the curse, and whether that will follow their lineage because they were raised under that without having the blessing of the Torah.
I understand what you're saying, and I agree.
Does that make sense?
Yep,
Okay.
I understand what you mean.
So the cursing is sort of built into the system if you don't follow the instructions. God's not going out of his way to curse you or your children, but if you don't teach them to do the right thing.
Yeah, if you don't
Inevitably.
teach them to do the right thing, then it's going to be that much harder for them to teach their children how to do the right thing, and the whole thing kind of perpetuates itself downhill.
I think Jacob would be a good example of that.
Oh, I do too. I think you could even go so far as to say the Amorites are a good example. Yeah, he's basically denying you a blessing.
Jerry, what's the story that when they're in the desert, they go out? I think it was when they were in the desert, but it may be a different story. I'm not sure. But where they went out and they conquered some people, and they were told to destroy everything, and some of them brought back the spoils of war in the camp, and God killed them and their family.
And
that in regard to that verse we were just looking at, where
there's a couple of things like that. There's certainly that happened 2 or 3 times in Joshua when they were taking over the land that God had promised them. There are 2 or 3 times it happened there. Beg your pardon? Achan is one of them, yeah. But there's 2 or 3 times where God told them to destroy them and they didn't, and so they had to pay for that. They were cursed, if you will. Yeah.
I thought it did. Maybe it didn't, but I thought.
I'm not
didn't
really
it
sure
swallow-
where
Didn't
the,
it swallow? Weren't they all swallowed up?
well,
That's
that was a
Corbin.
rebellion. That was a rebellion. And the whole family, well, the whole family died, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Well,
They're right. Some
Some
of the
did.
families survived through it
Right.
because, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, yeah, yeah. Well,
Let me.
one of the things, see, I'm going to say this, and you can push back or take it the wrong way, but I have to believe that God knows what He's doing, and so the place I ended up going to all the time on this is when God was negotiating, or Abraham was negotiating with God about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and he said, he's busy talking him down from 50 down to 10. If there's 50 righteous people, would you destroy the whole place for the 50 righteous people? And God says, no, I wouldn't do that. And what Abraham says, he says, surely the righteous God of all the world, all the universe, wouldn't do that. He wouldn't kill the just along with the unjust. And so the reason I say I have to fall back on that a lot, because there's a lot of times, especially in the Old Testament, the Torah in particular, when you say, boy, it looks like innocent children are being killed here. And we just have to know that God knows what He's doing. Maybe that's a cop-out, but, I don't have a better answer. Yeah.
God would be violating His own word if He were to do something to the innocent, because it says He hates those who shed innocent blood.
Yep.
So even
that's
if
a
we
good
don't
point.
understand, even if we don't know the whole picture and all the details, we have to trust that God does not destroy the innocent.
Yep. Yep. That's
So-
well said.
So one of the things that I see here is I'm watching the movie trailer or the synopses. I'm not getting to see the full details. But I imagine that if I go out to war and then I come back, Wanda's happy to see me, and I got a huge bag of goodies with me, and she already knows that Moshe or Joshua or whoever said, don't bring anything back with you. It should all be destroyed. And she says, what do you got? And I say, honey, we need to hide this in the closet. And she doesn't go out immediately and say, my husband has brought these things back. This is a violation against that. Purge the evil from among you. And she says, all right, but why did you, let's just hide it. She is,
Yeah.
what do they call it?
Accomplice.
Complicit.
Yeah,
Accomplice,
complicit, yeah,
right.
yeah.
So, to what degree this happened when they bring something back and they hide it in their tent or in their,
Yeah.
who knows?
Who knows?
But,
Who knows?
we're supposed to, like I say, we studied a couple of weeks ago where you turn in your own brother or,
Yeah.
your own
Oh,
spouse
yeah.
or whatever. It's kind of like you don't just let this rest.
Yeah. Yeah. Now these are tough words. John?
well, if it's a patriarchal system and the father's messing up, there are consequences,
Oh yeah.
and it goes downhill.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought about that, about the wife too, maybe Achan, told his wife. I would think in the case of like little kids, they don't know,
Yeah.
but when it gets to be Judgment Day, God's not going to hold them accountable for the sin of
No.
Achan.
Yeah.
He'll be accountable for his own sin, and maybe his wife and whoever else knew. But I was thinking in this scenario, I'm wondering if it's like a case where like a son commits, an offense that's punishable by death, and the father wants to step in and say, let me take his punishment for him.
Mhm.
And God say, no, son has to be accountable for his own sin.
Well, there's a couple thoughts there. One is that when sin is committed that is punishable by death, God does not allow redemption. So he says that very clearly that you don't get to do that, right?
Right.
But on the other hand, that's what his son did.
Yeah, I thought about that too, Lord.
Yeah.
Jesus died for us, even though we're the ones who deserve to die.
Uh-huh. But he did that totally voluntarily. I mean, it wasn't a case where he wanted to do that. Jesus, Yeshua did. Yeah.
You just have to remember there was a substitute.
Mm-hmm.
Death still had to come. A substitute was given. So, but like you said, it was voluntarily.
Yeah. So I think that the reason I say the voluntarily thing is that the gist of this is a father is not summoned to pay the price for the son's sin. Well, he could volunteer it. Well, he can, but theoretically the judge can't accept it.
Well, it kind of makes sense. So the sinner's going to keep living and not pay any, he's not going to pay a price? He's still among you now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. How does that wipe the evil from among you?
Right.
Yeah. I was thinking back about the innocent kids that get killed. Now, God being God, He can tell the life of that innocent child and what it would be if it were allowed to continue. And maybe this is the better thing. Yeah. We sure get a field on these. I mean,
One other thought that might help clarify that is so basically, yes, our sins were removed through His offering. Here's why and how that happened, how it differs from this. So we were given the bill of divorce, and that bill of divorce set us apart. Well, He can nullify a contract. By nullifying the contract, it ultimately nullifies the sin and the death that are associated with the contract because the contract's been nullified. And the only way that can be nullified is by His own death. So it's a contractual thing that was dealt with, and by nullifying that contract or that divorce certificate that was sent out, that's why our sin and death against that contract was removed.
So you're saying it's not quite analogous to this part right here. Is that, okay. One was a contract. Right.
well, we're in pretty deep. It's time to go to another horse.
One more thing,
Yes.
people, we assume that, all children are innocent. Well, when you got there are children, the people are raising their kids to blow up Jews because they're Jews.
Yeah.
I don't know how innocent they are. I mean, they may not be. It may be unfair that they're in that situation.
Yeah.
But if they've got evil put in on them right from their beginning,
That's why I say and the thing that I've learned that you really need to avoid is putting yourself in a position of judging God, of where you can say, I got you, you shouldn't have done that. That's, unfair or whatever. It's never us that's right. It's always Him. We need to understand this. If it doesn't seem consistent somehow, it's a fault of our understanding, I think. Or
you be like Moses and Abraham and negotiate well because you know his contract, and you quote his words back to him.
That's right. See,
Now you're not telling him what to do. You're just reminding him of his own words.
John's living proof that Jews make great lawyers. Let's negotiate about this. Okay, let's move on. We kicked that horse pretty hard. Verse 17, do not deprive the alien or the fatherless of justice, or take the cloak of the widow as a pledge. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and Yahweh your God redeemed you from there. That's why I command you to do this. Okay, that's more along the same lines here as the theme of what we've been reading. In other words, just because someone's not from here, not one of us, or they're a poor, orphan, or a widow, don't take advantage of them. When you think about it, this is not the first time we've seen that. There are numerous places in the Torah where it tells you not to be found mistreating aliens, widows, and orphans. Those are the three they always say.
And yeah,
and because
James calls that pure religion.
Yep, and God says, if I catch you doing this, I'm not going to look upon that lightly. He says that all over the place. But yeah.
The other thing is, he's describing the welfare system right here. This is how you this is how you run a welfare system. Here's how you look out for your neighbors. You go out of your way to make it capable for them to have dignity and you know, be able to survive. And
Yep. Yeah, you make that work, but you make that work.
right,
You don't-
you're proact. It's a proactive thing.
Yeah, you don't just elect some politician and get mad at him when he doesn't. Okay, let's see. He goes on, I'm always interested in this. This is one of the ones that's been popping up lately in my head. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt and that Yahweh your God redeemed you from there. That's why I command you to do this. He says that a lot. He says, remember, you were aliens in Egypt. And it's always along this same lines where he's saying, don't mistreat an alien, don't mistreat people, treat people with kindness and go out of your way, because remember, you were an alien in Egypt, and I heard you and I took care of you, so you should do this for them. So all the time he says.
Moses keeps reminding them of his word, and Yahweh keeps reminding them of where they came from and who took them out.
Yeah. We're going to read some more about that lately. Yes.
Jerry, we were talking about how God holds Israel holds them to account, even to the foreigner and those outside the community of Israel, whether it's a foreigner or an orphan. Yet it's interesting in verse 7 where he talks about kidnapping. The way the text reads anyway, he talks specifically about kidnapping a brother or a fellow member of the community of Israel. Then they're due the death penalty. It just seemed, following the theme that we've been talking about, couldn't have he just said, anybody that kidnaps another man is guilty and it's punishable by death? But he doesn't. He talks about kidnapping
A brother.
a brother or a fellow member.
I had
Then
never-
he goes on to talk about those outside the community of Israel, whether it's a foreigner or an orphan. But
I
it just seems
hadn't
interesting.
noticed that. Yeah, it does. I hadn't really noticed that, but you're right.
And of course, the consequence is severe for kidnapping. And now I don't know if that's because it's kidnapping a fellow member of the community of Israel or not. Just an observation.
No, that's a good one. There are a few places where it talks about things that they have to do for brother Israelites that they don't necessarily have to do for the aliens. One is charging interest. If you loan money or anything to a fellow Israelite, you don't charge them interest. But it's okay to charge interest to an alien. So yeah, there are places like that. Yeah.
I'd like to go back and reread that verse, but
Okay, I'll do it.
not now necessarily. But I'm just thinking off the top of my head: is it possible that that's talking about? Look, I have a covenant with you, Israel. These are your rules. The fact that other nations may do that or not do it, hopefully they don't. But I can't apply those rules to them because I'm not in covenant with them. They wouldn't be breaking any contract. I certainly don't want them to do that.
Yeah, but I don't have a contract.
But
with
I
them.
can't. Yeah, you're not breaking any law because we don't have a law yet. There's no contract with that nation. I don't know.
I don't know either. That's a good one. Okay, moving right along. I do that a lot whenever I don't know what to do. Verse 19. When you are harvesting in your field and you overlook a sheaf, do not go back to get it. Leave it for the alien, the fatherless, and the widow, so that Yahweh your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. When you beat the olives from your trees, do not go over the branches a second time. Leave what remains for the alien, the fatherless, and the widow. And when you harvest your grapes in your vineyard, do not go over the vines again. Leave what remains for the alien, the fatherless, and the widow. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that is why I command you to do this. So it's a little bit repetitive of the previous one. Yeah? Go ahead.
So I'm interested in permaculture and growing fruit trees and vegetables and all that good stuff. It seems to me if you do it right, you could just get, the abundance is just incredible you could have.
You mean from the gleaners?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and if you just said, I'm just going to take one pass through the field, I'm going to get so much because there's so much there that going back again is just sort of like, well, that's greed. But the point is, the opportunity for the poor to go out there on their own to get it is great. And so there's a lot there to get. It's just, what is it? What is the parable that there are many, there's much fruit, but not enough harvest?
Yeah, the harvesters are, something's plentiful, the crops are plentiful, but the
workers are
are
few.
Yeah, few. Workers are few, whatever. So I know what you mean.
Dave's got a question.
Uh-oh. Dave's going to tell us something.
It reminds me that it didn't say that, it says you're not supposed to do it the second time, But it also doesn't say go and do it the second time so you can go and give it to the poor. The poor can go out and go
Yeah.
and get it. So it's like being, if you're going to be slothful and just sit there and say, come and bring it to me,
Mhm.
you got to go out and get it,
Yeah.
do a little bit of work.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a fair point.
Well, it shows
And,
dignity.
and
It's-
nobody's going to look down upon you for doing it.
It's dignity for them, yeah.
This is for Derek and Tammy, question for them. They've been to Hands to the Land. They've
Okay.
been there for the grape gleaning, I'm guessing, right? So was this applied when the grape gleaning was done, when they went over it the one time? If there was anything left, did they leave it?
I don't recall actually leaving behind what wasn't gleaned the first time. I do recall some of the rabbis stringing off certain sections of the vineyard that was the first fruits and set apart. I believe they were doing that, was it in the Sabbath year or not? But they did have an interesting way of dealing with charity and giving to others, and I'll let Tammy explain that to you.
Just in the 7th year, all the grapes had to be, because you had to give the land back. So it would go back to the rabbis, and then the rabbis, we would still harvest it, but everything that was bottled was marked special for the Sabbath year, and then everything that earned would go to charity, so that no vineyard owner would be making money on that year, but they were still harvesting that year. So.
Okay.
And it was millions of dollars that
Oh,
they
I'm
get
sure.
from
I'm
their
sure it
wine.
was.
Like, it's not just.
I think that's compared to probably what's real common, that's pretty good, you know?
And that was the only other comment I was going to make, talking about leaving, don't going back and gleaning a second time. In my former grain buying days, we had grew up in a Mennonite community, and they were quite charitable in terms of donating grain to third world countries when they'd bring them to the elevator. And typically at the end of the year, when trucks would roll in with half a load or 3/4, it was not uncommon for that to be donated to the charities of their choice. We had one farmer in particular. It was interesting. He always took the loads from the top of the bin. So he always came in with a full load, not what was left after all the bins were shoveled and swept out. He brought really the first fruits
good
of his
stuff.
harvest.
Yeah.
So he would come in with full loads, not to diminish what the other people did, but they
Yeah.
only come in with a part load. So he really took this commandment
Very seriously.
to the far end.
Yeah, yeah. And the way God would treat that is as a special blessing, you know, because, like I say, God knows what you're doing. Yeah. Let's see, does this little story here, or these rules, remind you of something in the Torah or in the Bible? It's Ruth. Yeah, Ruth was she would go down there, and Naomi told her to sleep at the feet of Boaz, right? And she would go I think, if I'm not mistaken, I'd have to go back and reread it. She would go after they had already harvested and pick up what was left. So this was commonly done. And someone else mentioned, I forgot, but it also does somehow preserve the dignity of the recipient, right? Because, like I say, you don't sneak in and hope nobody sees you. You know, it's common. I'm sure there was a lot of people out there walking up and down this vineyard whenever, after the grapes had been harvested. Yeah, John?
Well, it isn't just that you're sneaking in, but it's that you're doing at least some work. You're not just sitting there.
Yeah.
Feed me. I'm not even going to move and go out into the field where all the other work necessary to get the fruit to that point is done. You can't go out and go get it. That you're that pathetic.
Yeah.
That's not good. So that's the dignity I was thinking of.
Okay.
But your point was good too.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anything else? You want to move on? Chapter 25. Well, let's see. This will clearly take us through the end, but let's read all of chapter 25, and if we don't finish, we'll come back and finish next week, okay? Would somebody like to read chapter 25? It's not that long. We're only talking 19 verses. We'll read the first 19 verses of chapter 25. Thanks.
If there is a dispute between men and they come to court, that the judges may judge them, and they justify the righteous and condemn the wicked, then it shall be, if the wicked man deserves to be beaten, that the judge will cause him to lie down and be beaten in his presence, according to his guilt, with a certain number of blows. 40 blows he may give him, and no more, lest he should exceed this and beat him with many blows above these, and your brother be humiliated in your sight. You shall not muzzle an ox while it treads out the grain. If brothers dwell together, and one of them dies and has no son, the widow of the dead man shall not be married to a stranger outside the family. Her husband's brother shall go in to her, take her as his wife, and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. And it shall be that the firstborn son which she bears will succeed to the name of his dead brother, that his name may not be blotted out of Israel. But if the man does not want to take his brother's wife, then let his brother's wife go up to the gate to the elders and say, my husband's brother refuses to raise up a name to his brother in Israel. He will not perform the duty of my husband's brother. Then the elders of his city shall call him and speak to him. But if he stands firm and says, I do not want to take her, then his brother's wife shall come to him in the presence of the elders, remove his sandal from his foot, spit in his face, and answer and say, so shall it be done to the man who will not build up his brother's house. And his name shall be called in Israel, the house of him who had his sandal removed. If two men fight together, and the wife of one draws near to rescue her husband from the hand of one attacking him, and puts out her hand and seizes him by the genitals, then you shall cut off her hand. Your eye shall not pity her. You shall not have in your bag differing weights, a heavy and a light. You shall not have in your house differing measures, a large and a small. You shall have a perfect and a just weight, a perfect and a just measure, that your days may be lengthened in the land which the Lord your God is giving you. For all who do such things, all who behave unrighteously, are an abomination to the Lord your God. Remember what Amalek did to you on the way as you were coming out of Egypt, how he met you on the way and attacked you, your rear ranks, all the stragglers of your rear, when you were tired and weary, and he did not fear God. Therefore it shall be, when the Lord your God has taken you, has given you rest from your enemies all around in the land which the Lord your God is giving you to possess as an inheritance, that you will blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. You shall not forget.
Okay, thanks. That's the end of the portion, the parashah, number 49, not that it matters. So there's some interesting things here.
Ruth is brought up.
Yep.
Or the
Yep.
comparison to Ruth.
Yep. Let's start at the beginning of 25, though we'll hit all of that. So when men have a dispute and they take it to court, and the innocent are found innocent and the guilty are found guilty, if the guilty man deserves to be beaten, the judge shall make him lie down and have him flogged in his presence with the number of lashes his crime deserves, but he must not give him more than 40. If he is logged for more than that, your brother will be degraded in your eyes. So what do you think of that? 40 lashes. You say 40 lashes with a wet noodle, right? So
40 save one.
40 save one. Yep. So Mark's got something to say about that. That's good. Because I don't have much.
So this is why they get the idea that Yeshua took 39 lashes, because it's the 40 minus 1 from this passage. Being that it was the Pharisees who were observing by their decree that he be put to death, they were making sure that since they knew he was innocent, that part wasn't violated.
Okay. Does anybody have any idea or any thoughts about why 40 lashes, or the 40 less 1 is okay, but as soon as you go over 40, it degrades him?
I just find it, a cynic would say, oh, well, gee, that's so merciful. I only got 39 lashes instead of 40.
Obviously, I mean, I've heard real gross and graphic discussions of how 40 lashes usually kills a person. You know, this was no meager little thing they were doing. It was a pretty gruesome thing. So Most people couldn't last through 40 lashes. But I just wonder the number 40 and why, what's the idea about degrading? I mean,
40 is testing,
yeah, 40 is the number of testing, and that's good. That's good.
but it's
I think it's interesting that the judge has to be there.
the judge or the,
It says the judge shall make him lie down and have him flogged in his presence.
oh, I thought it was talking about the accuser.
No, I don't
You're
think so.
right.
I think it's the judge. Yeah. That's a good point. That's a good point. So it's okay. Well, that's a good point. The idea of all of this, I mean, that even goes back to the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth thing, is that the whole point of the judging system is that the judgment has to be, the punishment has to be commensurate with the crime. And you can't have different punishments for the same crime based on who did it. You know, it's got to be the same punishment for the same crime consistently. And so 39 lashes would be probably the heaviest penalty short of death. But there's nothing that says it couldn't be 20 or whatever. And probably a lot of them were smaller than that. And that you bring up another point there, that the judge was around to verify, you know, that it was carried out appropriately. The judges had a tremendous responsibility. They had a bunch of power, but they had a big responsibility. We've read several times where, you know, God admonishes the people, says, basically, whatever the judge says, you have to do it. You know, you do it. There's no, I don't remember exactly some of the stuff, but it was very, you know, demanding. You have to do what the judge says, even if you don't agree with him, if you will. Yeah.
So assuming the judge is a sympathetic person, you know, and I'm assuming he's not enjoying this, he's not a masochist or a sadist, whatever. He's there because that's really what this guy deserves. I guess is kind of what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
And it would force him to make sure that he's gone out of his way to allow due process to occur to the one whose sentence he's getting from the judge.
Yeah. Yeah. That's part of his responsibility.
Yeah, instead of farming it out to somebody else down the road.
Exactly.
Right? The hangman, I'll go talk to, whatever, it's not my problem anymore.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of things would be different if the people that had to make the decision actually had to follow through on the consequences of that decision. You know, certainly with a judge it would be.
So when you come up with ideas, a lot of times you're the guy stuck with the idea, is that?
Inside joke, John. That's funny. That's very funny. All right, let's see here. Do not muzzle an ox while it's treading out the grain. Boy, we've heard that one a few times, haven't we? I mean, I think this is the only time it's actually written here, but how's that usually applied? Are you going to go back?
I have a question on that one
Okay,
because
that's
the
fine.
Hebrew word used there is for judge, to judge,
Mm-hmm.
treading out.
Does it say it again? Which word is which?
The word treading out is, yeah.
Shoftim?
To judge. Din. Yeah. And corresponds to judge or.
Shoftim means
to
judges,
act
yeah.
as- Yeah, so I'm wondering,
Well,
I
yeah.
get how that's, there's a connection that I'm missing where, because he's talking about a dispute, bringing it to a
yeah,
judge,
yeah.
and then it goes down into 4, you shall not muzzle an ox when he's treading the grain.
Yeah, it's one of these
and
that
it's
kind of
to
goes
judge.
spook, and I
But
don't get it.
It's tight, but the word used there is to judge.
Judge. So if we could be, that thing could have been mistranslated or translated in a misleading fashion and been like this for years, and we're the first people on earth to discover it, you think? Okay,
Dish, that's the Hebrew transliteration? Like dish it out?
so he says, you guys are differing on the word.
Well, obviously his was den, like Bet Din, the house of judgment. I mean, you got the judge, the judgment, and the sentence. Those are,
All three the same kind of word?
oh, no, I don't.
Yeah. Well, I
The
don't
judge
know.
is the Shove team, or the judges.
I remember Shove team being judges, but I don't remember any of these others. But I never have understood that one. I mean, I understand what it means in the plain sense of it. It's not a very nice thing to do to have your ox sitting there threshing out the grain but not being able to have any. I can get that, but that's pretty minimal, and I don't really see how it applies to what we're talking about. So that'll be one I ask him when we get there. Anybody have any insight into that? It's one that's usually applied by our New Testament brothers that talk about people that minister the word are entitled to being paid for it. That's the way I've always heard that used. And whether or not it actually applies to that, I don't know. I remember, but since I don't have anything better, it's hard for me to deny that. Do you know what it means, Mark? The
Muzzling the ox.
muzzling the ox while treading out the grain.
It's just merciful.
Well, what does it mean? Do not muzzle an ox while treading out the grain.
Be merciful to him. Let him eat it.
That's all I get out of it is be.
What it means is when the ox is going around the circle,
Yeah,
they're keeping him from eating the grain that he's grinding.
yeah,
Not, you can't muzzle him and keep him from doing that. He's allowed to eat it while he's working.
yeah.
And it's why they use the saying, you can't muzzle the worker, he's due his wages
Yeah.
while he's working. And so you can't prohibit that ox from getting his wages while he's working.
Okay,
He's due his liquid and his food.
Okay.
So let him eat the grain as he's crushing it.
okay. So that's what I thought it meant, but I just have trouble applying that here. But that's okay. I'm obviously not all by myself. Let's move on. Verse 5. If brothers are living together and one of them dies without a son, his widow must not marry outside the family. Her husband's brother shall take her and marry her and fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law to her. The first son she bears shall carry on the name of the dead brother, so that his name will not be blotted out from Israel. Now, that's called the law of Levirate marriage, right? And actually, that's still practiced some today. Do you see how it works? If two brothers are married and one of the brothers dies before he has children, then the other brother is obligated to take his brother's widow as his wife. And if she conceives and bears a child, that child is the heir. Yeah, Mark. Uh-oh.
There's something comical to add to it.
Okay.
Now you know why the sons of Jacob were encouraged to marry such beautiful women.
Yeah, you can marry her. I might end up with her one of these days. That's right. There you go. There you go. So anyway, that's, like I say, that's a common thing.
Wasn't there a son of Judah that this happened to and they didn't fulfill this? And who was that?
Oh, Tamar.
To Tamar, yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Hold on.
Yep. That's okay.
Because because they didn't follow this instruction, she had to dress up like a prostitute to get pregnant so that it could be carried on, and our lineage of the Messiah actually came through that.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
She did. Yeah, but that was because Jacob didn't do this and give the third son, right? Because the first two died, and he was supposed to give the third one, and he never did, so she dressed up as a prostitute, got pregnant. But it does say that they never were married. Like, they had the children, and he treated her well, but he didn't. They weren't husband and wife, but it was his fault for not following the law. And our lineage from the Messiah comes because of that, right?
That's right. Well, yeah,
The second son didn't perform the duty.
yeah.
He cast his seed on the ground.
But, beg pardon? Mm-hmm. Onan, yeah. Can you see the reason for doing this or having this rule, this law?
So that doesn't necessarily mean, going back to the different types of wives, that your brothers, is this always the older brother?
Not necessarily.
Okay. I thought
It's to
the
make
younger-
sure,
I
the
thought
point
you
is
said the
to
younger
make
brother.
sure that the inheritance of the land doesn't go outside the family, outside the clan. That's what it's for.
So,
The name is continued. Yeah.
right, the name is carried on.
Yeah.
But why would anybody, why would a man not want to do that? I mean, what is his main reason? I have to deal with this other woman now and I don't want to do that, or what?
Yeah. I mean, I can, sure.
Well, you've got a lot of things like, you know, the other thing about what you were saying is why, you know, why was this done? Not only for the inheritance, but also for the name of the deceased. But the third thing is the woman has rights.
Mm-hmm.
And God says she has conjugal rights. She has rights. I mean, God's thinking about her too.
Yes.
She has the right to have children.
Yeah.
And just because her husband dies doesn't mean she's now to be a destitute woman to never have children. She has rights as well. Yeah. So see, God's thinking about, just like he's always thinking about the widow, the orphan, the hungry, the poor. He's thinking about the people that can't take care of themselves or can't or have no way to obtain. He wants them taken care of.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, there's these cases where guys didn't want to do it because of the cost involved.
Yeah, I already got a good
you know,
wife. I don't need another one.
Yeah, so the cost involved was too great, or I don't want to split my land up with that kid or her.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he didn't like her. There's all kinds of things. Guys were doing things thinking of themselves and not thinking about the brother. Love your brother.
Yep.
And this is a way to love your brother, you know. And again, we've talked about this before, just so you guys know that are first time here. We've talked about this before, that men, it's my opinion, a righteous man does not have the intent to take a woman for self-pleasure. If he's a righteous man, he's doing it because it's right to do and because he's wanting her to be blessed. It's not about the person.
No.
It's about the person that has the
Well,
need.
and it's
And
about,
that's the righteous way to look at it.
sure, it's about the dead brother. Yeah. Now, you know, it occurred to me just now, there's a similar situation with Zelophehad's daughters. Remember that? Zelophehad was this guy.
Manasseh, the daughters of Manasseh?
No, Zelophehad. I don't know how you pronounce it. Zelophehad is the way I pronounce it. He had 4 daughters and no sons.
Yeah, he was from Manasseh.
Okay, I didn't know where he was from. Anyway, so they went to Moses and they said, this is not right because we won't, you know, what's going to happen to the land of our father? And Moses says, well, rather than come right out with something like I would do, he said, I'll go ask God about this. And he comes back and he said, you can marry, but you have to marry within the clan. You have to find some second or third cousin, somebody that's within the tribe, if you will. And if you marry within the tribe, then the family land stays within the family tribe boundaries. It's really interesting that God really intended that to be the case. Can you imagine what Israel would be like today if they all did that like they were supposed to? Yeah.
To add on to what Mark was talking about, her children her welfare as well. That's another way of tying it back to the previous chapter.
Yep.
He's being the welfare.
That's right. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I read somewhere just today that once this widow, this brother-in-law, sister-in-law's has a son, they can no longer be married because she now has the ability she has a future. See, that once she has a son, they have their own family now. The son will take care of her, and her security is assured, if you will. She has land.
So she moves into his son's house?
I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is that's when the duty is fulfilled.
Okay, I see.
Yeah. Yeah.
She may take the deceased brother's property.
Yeah. 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 Just a second. We'll get you the microphone.
I don't want to seem naive,
Oh, it's okay.
but how would that apply to today? What if all your brothers are married?
Well, it doesn't matter. Back then,
But today,
yeah, I know. There's a movie out. I don't know how realistic the movie is about the practicing Jews in New York. This happened to one of them. I don't think there's. Are you talking about legally?
legally or just socially acceptable?
I think both of them would probably be real difficult, but I think you could do it. That's my opinion.
Hold on, Mark. I know you're at the other end.
We have to be thinking in terms of, remember what we always talk about, we got to have God's heart. And so in today, just like if we see someone destitute or poor that's one of our brothers, we're going to take care of them because we have the heart to try to take care of them. So the same applies here. Whether if everybody's married and someone's like that, if everybody has the heart of God and they're really thinking about her welfare and her rights, you're going to do the right thing, you know. And so I feel because of the rights of the person, and we have to have that heart of God. It's never about us. It's not, if ever it's for man's pleasure and man's own good, it's the wrong approach. And we got, step back and rethink, because that's already on the wrong foot.
I have another thought about that. We're in the process of getting ready to get our son married. And he's not walking in quite the way I'd like him to walk, you know. So we had a big discussion about marriage. And I've come to believe, you guys can, disagree with me on this, that the marriage is really a contract or a commitment that you make to each other in the presence of God. It's a vow that you make to each other, and you basically are promising before God. All the rest of this stuff is, who cares? So in the situation that you just defined, I feel like that if the brother-in-law and the widow basically agreed, okay, we're going to do this, and they made the commitment to be married in front of God by virtue of this law right here, then whether or not they got a marriage license or anything else is totally irrelevant. And I bet they could do that.
Yeah, that was going to be my point. If the question was a legal one, I'm telling you, the secular state walks away quickly when you can make a valid religious argument.
Yep.
Your strongly held religious beliefs and convictions are the most powerful thing you have.
Yep.
So even the state, all these crazy laws that we have out there, if they could be challenged in a way that's like what I'm talking about, and there's it's a reasonable thing. Well, I don't think it's culturally acceptable to do this. Well, here it is. Argue with God. Argue with Moses.
Yeah.
It's the foundations of our.
I'm doing this right here.
Yeah, don't take it up. Take it up with God. It's not my problem.
Yeah. I don't know. It just occurred to me because of these discussions that we're having with my son that helped me too, because I end up that's what I want them to do. I want them to make this commitment to each other in front of God and be serious about it.
It's a serious thing.
And once they're serious about that, I don't care what else happens.
Here's a slightly different shade on it, because we're talking about how would this apply today. This had to do with the name being carried in Israel,
Yep.
that the property would still be there.
Yep.
So it was basically about an inheritance
Yep.
and property rights and making sure that this widow would be taken care of.
Yep.
Now, today, how that would apply. Is there a name associated with it? Is there property associated with it? Is there an inheritance that we're so many things are disconnected.
They're
from the
different.
intent.
There's much different today.
Yeah, it is. So
I'm resisting making a comment.
That first step's so woozy.
Yeah, I'll bet.
I had something brilliant to say, but I got distracted. Oh, he was so excited. Yeah.
I got so excited. I was thinking about how things apply in the law today.
Yep.
I was, as a paralegal, I've helped several guys when it came to trying to pay their child support. And if they got behind and they were trying to make the payments, and the judge would come along and, like a wicked judge, say, well, I'm going to remove your license to do your job. And then you go, now how can the guy make money?
Yeah.
Now you're making it even harder for him. You might as well call him Pharaoh and say, now you're taking away the straw too.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, if I'd have just known these things, I could have brought this up in court. So
You got an extra point for bringing biblical references. John.
So just another thing too is, This is the similar situation with Boaz, isn't it?
Yeah, we were
Boaz-
good. Yeah.
Right, so the guy who's supposed to do this,
Yep.
the punishment isn't like a death sentence
No,
or anything
no.
like that. It's a shameful thing.
Yeah.
But if he doesn't want to do it, it's sort of like he has the first right of refusal
Yep.
to do what he's responsible to do.
And if he doesn't do it, I'm sure they've got a very organized pathway they go down in terms of relations. You know,
Right.
if one of the brothers doesn't want to do it, then I don't know, an uncle or an uncle's son. You know, I'm sure it's within the family as tightly as they can keep it.
Are we talking about this law? Does it carry on within the Jewish community right now?
Not often, but sometimes this law is carried out within the Jewish
Okay,
community.
are we assuming that the brother that survived is not married? And if he is married, he's got a wife? And then he's going to have two wives?
Yes, that's what her point was, yeah.
Yeah.
You,
So in searching this out this last year, I discovered, first time ever after looking at the Hebrew all these years, finally realized that like in Jacob, he has how many women? 4? Only one of them have the letters, usually it's Isha, how many of you know it's Isha? But in Rebecca's case, it's Ishto. There's a Tav in there. All the others are missing the Tav, meaning Tav is the covenant. She's the covenant wife. Same thing applies with Hagar and Sarah. Hagar's never called Ishto. She's only called Isha. Same applies to David's wives, and he had 9 of them, or thereabouts. Only one was called Ishto. So one of them had covenant status, the other ones did not. And so that's one of the differences. But yeah, it's so foreign to us, it's hard to even fathom and imagine. But the only way I can wrap my head around it is taking care of the people that have rights and needs. That's what God's about.
Yeah.
Now, it's not about us. It's not about pleasure. It's not about, we think about, Solomon had all these for his own pleasure. Well, if that's what he was doing, he was wrong from the get-go. I remember when, what's her name? Is it Abigail who went out?
Yep.
Okay, so here her husband dies. Did David take her because she was beautiful, or did he take her because a woman would have been in need? I would like to think David took her because it was a woman that was in need. That's just my hope in what was going on.
You were probably addressing the legal issue, and my point is the government really doesn't have any business. If the guy's married and he has his sister-in-law living with him, what's the government care about that? You don't need a license.
We're
That's
a
my
little over,
point.
but I looked in Ruth here, and the person, as in Boaz, is called the kinsman redeemer.
Yeah.
And the first guy, he actually gave the first guy, he said, you can do it if you want. And the guy said, I'll do it. But then he said, then you have to take Naomi and all this. And the guy didn't want to do it because he said, it might endanger my own estate. So, and then it describes about the sandal. And it says that he took off his sandal and gave it to the other. This was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel.
Well, that's what this kind of transaction, notice it leaves out the spitting part. We've gone a little over, so I realize we're kind of in the middle of this, but we can pick up. We haven't got to this Ruth and sandal thing yet. We'll do that next week. Something forward to look forward to. Let me close. Well, Father God, thank you for the evening. Thank you for your word. Thanks for the discussion it leads to. And there's lots to go off and think about, and I just appreciate the fact that you work with us like this. And I never cease to be amazed at the depth of your Torah. There's always something to think about and some new insight into you. And I ask that you just help us to think on these things as we go through the week. Keep us safe. Help us to think often of you and to reflect on how you'd like us to interact with other people we come in contact with. And just take care of us, God, until we meet together on Shabbat. In Yeshua's name, amen. Thank you very much. It's been fun.
Thank you,
Next
Jerry.
week, we'll do it again.